You're listening to Why We Do What We Do. Welcome to Why We Do What We Do. I am your space future predicting host, Abraham.
And I'm your goat host, Shane.
Nice. And hey, Shane, what are we gonna do today?
So today we are going to tell your fortune.
Lovely.
We're going to talk about the stars. We're going to talk about planets. We're going to talk about so many things that are unrelated, but somehow they are.
I love stars and planets.
I mean, stars and planets are great, but let's talk about how stars and planets have made you the person who you are. And I'm really excited about that part.
Okay.
Yeah, we're talking about astrology today.
Indeed.
Fair warning, it's going to be a little bit of a snarky episode.
Yeah, we'll try and rein it in as much as possible, understanding that like this is a thing that some people find joy in, and that's great. Good for you. More power to you.
Yeah.
And like, we love science and we embrace a scientific approach to things, and so we get to tease people who decide that they're not going to play that game because they're being silly.
And I think it always comes back to, as long as it's not harmful, we're not going to yuck your yum. We have a problem when it becomes harmful.
Right.
That's when we usually kind of like become very opinionated about something.
Yes.
It's like there is a line where we're like, yeah, okay, fine. Like horoscopes are fun and all that stuff. But when it becomes a significant problem for somebody and it starts impacting other people, then we take umbrage. Yeah,
exactly. And before we get started, of course, we are a science psychology podcast. We love to talk about psychology related topics. If you'd like to support the show, you can join us on Patreon, leave us a rating and review. We'll talk more about that at the end. Otherwise, you can support us. But as we said, we're talking about astrology. So let's start by reading our horoscopes.
To preface this show, I am a Capricorn, or so I thought I was until I did this episode. And so I'm going to base everything I talk about as a Capricorn as we go. So my horoscope today is, you've got a lot on your mind right now, Capricorn, and others might be interpreting your quiet behavior as you're being aloof. Go right ahead and let them think whatever they want. You've got some real issues to think through and decisions with important consequences to come up with. You'll be able to smooth their ruffled feathers later. Right now, just focus on taking care of yourself.
Okay. How applicable does that feel to your situation in life right now?
I mean, it is as applicable as something as vague as that could be.
Well said.
That's the only way I can say it. Yeah. So what's yours?
Yeah. So I'm a Libra. And so for today, my current horoscope, it says travel and adventure are on your mind. You could be daydreaming about flying to exotic places and doing unusual things, such as touring the ancient sites of India or going on safari in Kenya. Such dreams are possible, Libra, so you might want to look into it. You also might want to learn about exciting fields of interest, so this is a good day to sign up for a class or workshop.
Okay, what do you think?
Not very close. Not doing a lot of thinking about traveling. I don't have any upcoming travel. I don't have any particular ambitions to go on safari in Kenya. And I think given the state of the world, India is probably off the table for the moment.
That's fair.
I mean, I guess I could take a workshop, but I didn't really plan to. So
I was to say, but that's also like something we have to do anyway. So
that's true.
I always love looking at horoscopes just because it's like a fortune cookie. It's like it always applies because you can find meaning in it. But what we're going to do today is we're going to talk about this kind of stuff, and we're going to talk about what astrology is and how, not necessarily how horoscopes work, but kind of the predictive nature of astrology. And we're going to talk a little bit about the people that believe in it, how they get there, and maybe some kind of fun little tidbits around that.
I'll say fair warning that for those of you who are major enthusiasts of astrology or maybe curious about it, and we said that we would be a little bit snarky, and again, we like to just poke fun at things, and it's
our language. It's our love language.
No necessarily. We get a lot more serious and mean about things that are causing harm, and we're less forgiving of those. And this, astrology is not necessarily harmless, and we'll get to that, but it also is not necessarily harmful like some other pseudoscience type practices. But I do want to essentially warn that we're also not going to cover the full scope of this topic. There's a lot to talk about in astrology. There are people who spend years learning about this and writing about it and that sort of thing. And we're not going at that in depth. We're going to give, the basic broad strokes that should be a little bit more than most people are familiar, but not so much that you're going to leave this episode being a scholar of astrology.
Yeah, that's accurate. I mean, as we were doing the notes for this, there's a very rich history and study of astrology that leads up to a certain time. And then once that time hits, it kind of falls by the wayside. But it is definitely worth kind of taking a moment to say, like, you know, there is so much to unpack within it. And there's so much kind of wooey within it too, that it's hard to give all of it equal fair share of attention. So we did our best to hit the main bullet points. But, you know, if you are somebody who is a fan, you'll probably see some gaps here and there.
Fair enough. Yeah, rich history to the tune of like $2 billion. But
yeah,
I'm jumping ahead. Let's get into some background and define our topic here. And so we'll start by talking about what astrology is, and that is a practice that includes various religious and divinatory practices heavily based on studying and interpreting the positions of celestial bodies in relation to Earth. And I think not necessarily the position in where they actually exist in space in relation to Earth, but simply how they look in their overall arrangement. Because we look at a constellation that might have some stars, it might have some galaxies, and we don't differentiate those things. And one of them might be like hundreds of thousands of light years or millions of light years further away than another one, but we're treating them as if they're a part of the same group of celestial bodies, right?
Right, absolutely.
Yeah, and so it's really not necessarily the position relative to Earth, except insofar as they appear to us as a 2D object in the sky.
Yeah.
We'll also dive further into the goals of astrology later in this discussion.
Yeah, absolutely. So I should also mention that, part of this too is like not just the celestial bodies in relation to Earth, but also in relation to the day and time you're born, like what the position of those things are in the sky when you're born. And so
very important.
I forgot to mention that in that little line, but that's really what it gets at. It's like, it really only makes sense if you're talking about your birth date and time and all those fun things.
So to be clear, the effect it has on us when we're born, it only happens when we leave the womb and stops happening. Whatever influence they would exert only happens at the moment of birth, and everything after that is just sort of like stuck in place. Is that right?
Yeah, it's like basically like a timestamp.
Okay.
Like, boom, Capricorn, this is what your influence is for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Unless we're talking about Mercury in retrograde, which is a whole different thing.
Okay.
All right. So astrology comes from the Latin word astrologia, and this is derived from the Greek word astron, meaning star, and logia, meaning study. And eventually astrologia began to mean star divination, and that's what it became synonymous with. And astronomia began to be used as a scientific term as we go forward. And if you're familiar with the term astronomy, that's where it comes from.
I think I had read, and I believe it was in one of Carl Sagan's books, just interesting etymology thing, that the word disaster comes from bad star, aster as being star, and dis being bad or destructive or something like destructive star.
That's a good word.
Yeah. And Finch used that, like a bad star. So I got that.
Oh, yeah. I guess you're right. There's your Finch reference for today.
That's right.
Remember that band. What It Is to Burn is a great record. Go listen to it.
Exactly. Yeah. Apparently we need more references from old punk, ska, and like screamo bands in here. Well received.
Yes, absolutely. We've got this. We got it covered.
Yep.
We got it covered.
So, we were talking about astrologia, and eventually astrologia began to mean star divination, and astronomia began to be used as the scientific term for the study of the stars in the sky. So we saw that split in how those terms were being used, which is important because they used to be one and the same.
The term astrology and the actual practice of astrology dates as far back as 1950 BCE during the Mesopotamian Empire. And over time, texts and writings around astrology can be found in China, India, Egypt, Greece. And those are just a few of the places that you start seeing this practice occur. And then you start seeing translations of astrology works that have also been found in Islamic and Arabic languages. So you start seeing kind of this growth in astrology over many, many centuries, millennia even.
And it wasn't until the 17th century that actual science began to really question astrology as a practice. And so with the rise in academic rigor and scientific study and the adoption of the scientific method and that sort of thing, astrology began to lose a little of its luster with people who are interested in learning about the universe and how things work. And the academic world began to not only lose interest, but kind of start to sever its relation and ties with continued studies in the area of astrology and looking at what astrology might have to offer, because it was, finding that it had relatively little validity, which is to say none. And, there were positing things that were difficult or impossible to measure. The things that were possible or available for measurement were not yielding results that would support the hypotheses that started it. So there's a little bit of trouble in the bedroom.
Yeah.
I guess we'll say.
It became an obsolete study as we learned new information. And that's just kind of how science works,
Yeah.
right? Like as we continue to gather more information, things that we used to believe in no longer hold as much water or hold as much weight as we kind of start to understand a phenomenon. Now, I think it's important to note that across a variety of cultures, there is an importance related to the study of the stars. I mean, I would say every culture has some importance with this, but just to kind of give some examples, what we found is there are a lot of cultures that actually had a practical use for this. The Mayans created a fairly accurate calendar compared to other civilizations at the time, and including ours. Pretty accurate comparatively. Sailors across a variety of cultures consulted star maps and star charts to help provide guides while sailing large distances.
Absolutely.
Which can actually be incredibly useful. I mean, that's the North Star and all those things are used as guides. And so it is important to note, like when we talk about the study of the sky specifically is what this is kind of getting at. There is utility in that. There is utility in those practical applications, which, with modern technology has made that less and less practical and useful. But as a backup, it's still good to know kind of what the sky looks like when you're traveling and maybe your technology has failed.
Yeah, maybe less practical for travelers, but definitely something that we've seen continued and even increased interest in among scientists who are out. They just, at the time of this recording, the James Webb Telescope is relatively recently launched and is now opened and starting to snap pictures of the universe out in space. And so that's definitely something that continues to capture the imagination of scientists, at least mapping the stars and whatnot. Now, today, according to Columbia University, about 30 to 40% of Americans continue to regularly follow astrology practices. That is so many.
It's a lot of people.
I'm surprised actually at that number. And apparently this is on the rise with its highest level of belief since 1983. And side note, what was going on in 1983 that may have led to this? The rise and fall of the hippie movement, satanic panic.
Just kind of curious. Cocaine?
Yeah. Pantera, maybe.
Pantera. Well, they did put out that album, Metal Magic. So, maybe that's what it was. They were like, okay.
Found it. All right. So that was the cause. Pantera came out, and then there was an increase in astrology-related beliefs. Now, in some countries, astrology is still classified as a science and study full of academic rigor. And I'm curious. I'm not sure if you found this in your notes, but do you know if that is because they are calling astronomy astrology, or if it's actually the practice we call astrology that they're referring to as a scientific endeavor?
It's the practice that we're referring to. Specifically, they cited India as a place where this was occurring a lot. And you'll see as we go into some of the other stuff, there are very famous people who are consulting astrologers who have studied in these spaces that are academic universities who are teaching astrology as an official science.
Interesting. Well, here's what I think we should do. Why don't I go investigate those universities? And in the meantime, we'll have some elevator music style ads for people to listen to. And then we'll come back and talk about how this astrology thing, what it's supposed to do.
Sounds good.
All right, we're back. We were talking about where astrology exists, and now we're going to talk about astrology, what it do.
Ultimately, the aim of astrology is to describe and connect terrestrial events like births and stuff like that.
They're not real.
And things and relationships that happen in your life. Terrestrial events or births. Births aren't real?
Yeah.
That's my new favorite one. Nobody was ever born. We were all hatched. The idea is to connect those terrestrial events to celestial events. So in other words, what happens in space has a direct impact on what happens on Earth.
And to be fair, that is partially true, given how astrophysics and sort of the order and organization of the universe works, with as much of it as we know, generally speaking. So, for instance, the sun provides quite a bit of heat. For those of you who aren't aware, that's the reason we're able to exist on this planet. It warms up the planets that are closest to it with a diminishing amount of heat the further away you get. That specific celestial body and our distance from that body places us on what is commonly referred to as the Goldilocks zone, which is the zone that is what we consider necessary for cultivating life or creating circumstances that are appropriate for life. And mostly because they call it Goldilocks because it's not too hot, not too cold, just right.
It's just right.
Yeah, if we were a lot hotter, we wouldn't be able to sustain life. If we were a lot colder, we wouldn't be able to sustain life. But the way that we have defined life and we understand it, at least using our solar system as a model, we're in the Goldilocks zone.
To kind of give another example, Earth is not the only planet in our solar system within the Goldilocks zone. Mars is also in the habitable zone in our solar system. It's just a little bit further out.
True. And just because something is in the Goldilocks zone does not mean that it will host life. There are plenty of reasons a planet will exist in what's considered the Goldilocks zone, but the planet itself is not set up to have life thrive and survive on it.
But that's life science. That's not astrology. So the folks who practice astrology believe in a clever mix of art, science, and divination to explain what happens on our planet to people in relation to these celestial bodies. And the main parts are mostly a little bit of science and a lot of destiny and divination. Basically, what's happening here is like the day that you were born, the day where the planets are, which house it's in, and we'll get into the houses and whatnot too, is really going to define a few things. It's going to define who you are as a person. It's going to define your personality and actually describe your fate going forward. Your as George McFly said, your density.
Your density. That's right. That's really good. I don't know. Is this a vocab term? Divination? Should we treat that as a vocab?
I think we should.
All right, great. So then for those who are unfamiliar, the term divination essentially means that someone is attempting to predict, foretell, or gain some insight about a particular situation or context. Essentially, the goal is to gather information from some event and help predict future events. And this is done a number of ways. It's usually going to be something where you are trying to interpret ambiguous aspects of reality in a way that foretells or tells you something meaningful about the patterns in existing realities. Sort of like, it's like the Matrix, like somehow you're able to like peer into the dot code matrix of what's underlying reality, right? And so essentially you take something like reading signs, events, some kind of omen through some kind of, that depict or through some supernatural means. You maybe have seen people who will throw bones on the ground, like animal bones, and try and read those, or entrails is like a common thing that they'll depict, at least cinematically, with like witches and warlocks. There's people who read tea leaves. That's like a whole saying now, reading tea leaves, right? And that's like what's at the bottom of a teacup and interpreting the meanings and what they're supposed to predict about the future and that sort of thing. So all of those are this practice of divination.
Yeah, and so what astrology attempts to do is to use divination to help predict all sorts of events, like patterns of personality traits that emerge over a lifetime, responses to issues of love or conflict, or ideal moments to act based on alignments. And when we say alignments, we talk about stars and planetary alignments, and when is the best time versus the worst time to engage in a particular action.
And chiropractic alignments.
Could you imagine going to an astrological chiropractor?
I could.
I guess that's fair. That is a thing that could exist somewhere. I mean, I've learned about functional chiropractics. That's a different story too.
It seems like chiropractics and astrology aren't terribly far apart on things sometimes.
At least there's a little bit of study of anatomy in chiropractics.
Well, there's a little bit of study of the stars in astrology.
Oh, you're right. You make an excellent point.
Oh man, I get so many angry supporters of chiropractic calling in.
Yeah, right now we're not dogging chiropractic. That's going to be a different episode. Right now we are specifically talking about astrology. Yeah. So let's focus on the tea leaves.
Here, Let's just say that people believe some interesting things sometimes, and they might exist in any profession.
Yeah.
All right. So according to Britannica.com, there are several forms of astrology. I'm going to do my best to attempt this word. It says catarchic.
That's how I read it. Catarchic?
Catarchic.
Or catarchic? Catarchic?
Catarchic. That seems about right. We'll stop with that. This is a type of astrology that focuses primarily on whether a specific moment is, quote unquote, the right time for some kind of action. And this allows a person, or is supposed to allow a person, to predict or at least plan when to engage in some kind of behavior or action, because timing appropriately in the moment will yield a higher amount, or maybe the highest amount of possible success or beneficial outcome. And so that's a specific type of that catarchic or catarchic astrology.
Yeah, and we'll talk about that when we get to Ronald Reagan later, because I bet you didn't expect Ronald Reagan to show up in this episode. There's also interrogatory.
Yeah.
Is that how you would say that? Interrogatory?
I think that was perfect. Yeah, interrogatory.
Interrogatory?
Ooh, that's actually that's probably what it is.
Interrogatory or interrogatory?
I think it's interrogatory. I think you figured it out.
I think it is. All right. So interrogatory astrology is designed to provide answers for questions that a person might have about any number of things. And answers are divined based on the current positioning of celestial bodies. So it's essentially kind of a very complex magic 8-ball.
I was going to say, this sounds like the magic 8-ball version of astrology. Yeah.
Yeah. Except there's a few more variables in that. And we'll talk about that later too.
A magic 8-ball with like 3 like little dice things inside of it, whatever they are.
Yeah.
There are other forms, including iatromathematics, where astrology is applied to medicine, and military astrology, of course. They're both considered variants of the previously mentioned examples, though.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about how this works. We're going to give you some insight. It doesn't work. But if you wanted to play along, here we go. So many assume that astrology is based on when you were born, and that is partly true. Your birth date, time, year, they are supposed to serve as predictors for many things. So I want you to walk through this with me, Abraham. I want your thoughts on this.
We're acknowledging correctly, right, that what we mean is that when your body exits the body of your mother, and not while it's in the body of your mother, and at no other point in your life, just the moment when you finally exit via one hole or the other, that's when the magic happens, and then it's cemented in, right?
That's what's supposed to happen. That's your timestamp, which also leads to an interesting argument about abortion, because if your astrological sign doesn't take place until after you are leaving the womb,
okay,
is there life before that? I don't know. I'm just saying. If a fetus is a life at the very beginning, wouldn't astrology work for that fetus from the very beginning?
Yeah, and then wouldn't astrology start at conception, which would be 9 months before when you were born?
I don't know.
And then what do you do for people who were never born, like Greg Abbott?
They're summoned from a portal from hell.
Yeah, exactly. They just spontaneously arrive here through like a kaiju ripped in dimensions.
We're going to get to that. He might be the 13th sign. We'll talk about that later.
Perfect. Great. Yeah.
So to kind of break this up into follow along with me.
Okay.
Here. So I was born on January 18th, 1986 at 11:32 p.m. right when Saturday Night Live was starting. Live from my mom, it's me. Ta-da!
Yay.
Yay! So this means a few things for me, okay? So at that time and at that date, my sign is a Capricorn on the cusp of Aquarius. My symbol is a goat. My number is 7. My soul number is 9, okay?
What do you mean your number is 7?
That's what it says. I'm just going by what it says. I looked up all my stuff, so I'm just going with it.
Sorry, I'm just confused of like what number is, because I'm like, you're definitely not the 7th person that has ever lived. I doubt that you were your 7th child of your mother.
Nope, I'm number 1.
You're not quite 7 feet tall. So, I don't know. I just don't.
Not quite. I'm close.
All right, anyway.
I'm only like 9 inches short. Okay, so my element is earth, which means my descriptors or my personality traits are that I'm working towards a sense of confidence and reason. I dislike working without a clear target in mind, and I prefer facts instead of words, which I thought was interesting. I would prefer facts over non-facts.
Yeah, say words can be facts.
I particularly enjoy words.
You do. I also feel like, are there people in here who like working without confidence and without reason? Are there people who like working without a clear target in mind? I'm really curious.
There must be.
Yeah, according to this, it's everyone except you and the people born in the same month as you. Or like, time frame.
Right. There's got to be people that are in for process and not product, right? Like, so I imagine there's somebody there. But like that's how I would approach that. It's like people like doing things. They don't care what they're doing. They just like doing things. And I'm sure there's somebody, but I don't know.
They're like, there's no such thing as a broke system because a system is beautiful. I don't care I don't care how it works.
But that's not me. I'm a Capricorn. So that couldn't possibly be me. So
correct. Yeah.
We got to make sure that's clear. My modality is cardinal, which means that I prefer action over planning, that I'm energetic and I take initiative.
Okay. Sure.
I get along best with people who are considered Taurus, Pisces, Virgo, or Scorpio. Okay. They are those signs. I do not get along with Aries or Libra.
Oh, no.
I know. What are we going to do? Because you're a Libra.
I'm a Libra. We're now mortal enemies.
Oh, I know. Apparently, the thing is that the podcast was working really well until we realized this, and now it's just going to go downhill from here. So...
See, astrology, harmless.
Until it's not. And then the last little thing here I think is really fascinating is a Capricorn is ruled by the 10th house and the planet Saturn.
Okay. 10th house?
10th house. So let's talk about this. Let's talk about houses and planets.
All right, yeah, let's do it.
So in astrology, there are 12 houses. Each of these houses represents where we experience the interactions of our signs and the planets. So when we're born, we are born with a sign. This is the house in which I interact with my planet. So my planet is Saturn. My sign is, I'm in the 10th house. My planet is Saturn. And so that's where the energy fields are supposed to cross over and influence me in different directions. So specifically for me, the 10th house is the house of enterprise, which means that I benefit from effort.
Okay.
Okay.
So to be clear, a house is the same as the astrological sign to which you belong.
Yes. So every astrological sign belongs to a unique house. There are 12 signs. There are 12 houses. So if you're in, I believe it's Aries, Aries is the first house, and so on and so forth. So it doesn't matter what your sign is. Your sign is that your sign is assigned to a house.
So you could basically use the term your like zodiac or astrological sign interchangeably with the house.
Mm-hmm.
All right. 10th house. What else do you got for me?
So now regarding planets, the planets serve as the basic drive for a person. This is like our unconscious. Okay. So this is like Saturn is my unconscious. So like big on rings, apparently. I guess that maybe explains why I like Sonic the Hedgehog so much.
And all the piercings that you have.
And all the piercings that I have, and I have been married twice, so I guess rings are part of my life. I don't know. The other part is Freud loves planets, right? Apparently, because it's the unconscious piece. Now, for me, planet Saturn means a combination of things. It includes boundaries, resilience, and persistence. It will also influence me to conformity, focus, and precision.
Conformity, no. But
Right.
some of the other things are probably fine. Am I wrong? Do you feel like you're a conformist person?
I definitely don't feel like I'm a conformist, but I definitely, it's funny because it's one of those things where it's very easy to go, these are positive traits. So like, I want to relate to these things, right? Like focus, precision. It sounds good. So I want to benefit from effort. Literally everybody benefits from a little bit of effort. So that's kind of a funny thing.
Yeah.
Take initiative. Like I'm energetic. Like I feel like those things are within that, but I feel like if I pulled up another kind of one of the signs or one of the houses, I imagine that I would probably find similar agreeable preferred traits within that I'd be like, yeah, I relate to that. Yeah, I relate to that.
I would imagine.
When I kind of break this down, I go, when it says I do not get along with Aries or Libra, it's like, that doesn't make any sense.
Well, and to that point, we should probably talk about, is there harm? And if so, what is it? But first, we are going to let some celebrity sell you some magic tea leaves, and we'll be right back. Okay, so I got that sponsor wrong, but it kind of depends on when you listen to it. So maybe it was magical tea leaves. Most of the time, it just changes depending on who you are and where you are and what's going on when you listen to the episode. So
yeah,
good luck with your tea. So astrology, harmless, right?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, it's a fun little exercise to kind of maybe do some self-reflection and stuff like that. It doesn't really have a great impact on our day-to-day lives, and horoscopes are often vague predictions with buzzwords, no specifics, and so it's easy to read one and go, oh, for sure, totally. But is there a point where it becomes harmful? And to kind of illustrate this, as of 2021, the astrology industry is worth about $2.2 billion. That's a lot of money.
And like only half of that funds CPAC, so.
And only like a very small portion of that it would fund the military. So
that is true. That's nothing relative to where other money that's being spent. Yeah, so a lot of money being spent apparently on these ideas. Now, another interesting point about this is how it's targeted, because astrology is actually marketed to specific demographic people. Around 28% of women report believing in astrology, whereas only 23% of men report believing in it, which is not too bad until you learn that much of the astrology business marketing will specifically target females to sell whatever it's selling, right? And this includes television programming and ad revenue featured prominently on stations that target women as their primary demographic. And so there's, I think, an overall sense of important looking at sort of sexism. And the other thing too, I think, is how it markets and targets to women, because it has to make a lot of sort of stereotypes, general assumptions about women and what femininity is in a particular culture. Mm-hmm. We're an American culture, so what that might look like. And so that, I think, starts to then, there's going to be a disconnect between that and then people who, first of all, don't necessarily identify clearly with that gender or that sex or those expectations. But also, I think it continues to force the stereotypes, or I guess enforce and support stereotypes about what is expected of those particular genders. And those become the sort of systemic issues that we see, where if it even subtle little things about like what you're good at or not, or what your ambitions could or should be or not. And that becomes a problem because there are so many scientific fields that should all be basically completely split. We should have, every scientific field should have 50% of men and 50% of women, or you could look at it as like a good combination of men and women, and then people who are, transgender or identify differently than that. But whatever it is, the representation needs to be, I think, proportional to the population, because there is no advantage that one has being a particular gender at being good at like a science, right? Because all of these are language-based, research-based things. And so everybody has the equal potential to be good at it, or at least with respect to their sex and gender.
Yeah. Now, another part of this, too, when we talk about the idea of astrology being harmful, is the idea of fatalism. So what ends up happening is with astrology increasing, there's also this sense of fatalism that begins to emerge, where basically if everything is cosmic, everything is predicted, everything is set in stone, and from the time that I leave the womb, there is that timestamp, why fight against it? And it's actually, that leads to other more specific issues, right? So if I have a fatalist view, then that really doesn't set me into a position, or doesn't put me into a position where I want to change that, because changing that's futile.
Indeed. So furthermore, as this fatalism sort of philosophy ideology gains popularity and increases, there's a corresponding and concomitant decrease in critical thinking, which I would argue is maybe the most important thing that anybody should be learning anywhere. Mm-hmm. Like day one, critical thinking. And then once you've through that, then learn other things. But like, let's start there.
Yeah.
There is no need to think about a problem or actions if the card will fall in a certain way, because it's just destined to fall that way, right? Why bother doing anything if things are just going to turn out in a particular way? And this makes critical thinking and problem solving useless, because nothing that you can do can change the outcome. And I mean, this really just ties back to the idea that if everything that's happened is predicted, preordained, understood to be part of the sort of fabric of reality influenced by stars that are millions of light years away, and we can't do anything about it, well, then what are you going to do? Like, you got nothing.
Why bother?
Yeah.
That becomes a significant problem, right? Because at the end of the day, like, if this is what my fate is, then I resign myself to this fate, and I will never engage in behavior to get out of that fate. And that becomes kind of a unique issue too. But another thing too that astrology does, its ability to predict personalities can or quote unquote predict personalities.
Right. Vaguely describe them.
Yeah. But it immediately leads to a bias towards others. And so if I were going by the example of that I'm not supposed to get along with Libras, and I find out that Abraham's a Libra, then this podcast wouldn't exist, right?
Assuming you put any stock in that, yeah.
Yeah. If you put any stock in that, for sure. But like, for example, if I know you're a Taurus before we meet, and we don't need, then we don't actually need to meet. Right? If I know you're a Taurus and I know that I'm not going to get along with you, then we don't need to meet, because I know we won't match. And this cognitive bias actually produces a specific barrier to creating new and meaningful interpersonal relationships. And astrology kind of occasions that a little bit. It says, oh, you're this person, then we're not going to get along. Now, I can hear the detractors going, that's not what astrology is about. And I agree with you. But what I'm saying is at the end of the day, people will lean into that confirmation bias, that cognitive bias, and we have a specific quote later that will illustrate that a little bit more.
Out of curiosity, do you know what your partner's sign is?
She is a Libra as well.
Oh, okay. So you don't get along with her?
No, not at all.
Okay, great. Sounds like a perfect marriage.
Yeah.
At least an American one.
Hi-oh.
Well, let's talk about a little bit more of the actual science and behavior, sort of scientific view of this and what's going on. So just some basic understanding of the basis of astrology here. So astrological signs are predicated on the idea that months, the breaking of time into units of months, is cosmic. I think that there are some natural cycles that we can turn to. For example, the moon moves around the earth in approximately a month cycle. Now, it doesn't exactly match with the months that we've outlined, but it's kind of close. It's around the sort of 4-ish week cycle. Mm-hmm. But months on earth relative to earth and time are a cultural construct. A month on another planet is not going to be the month on our planet. As a matter of fact, there are some planets in our solar system that rotate so slowly that a week on one planet is longer than a year on the same planet. I think this is the case for Venus. I think that Venus rotates so slowly that it takes a year before it's even gone the entire week. Like if your work day is a week on Venus, you are having a miserable week.
Yeah, it also rotates backwards, right?
Oh, does it?
I think Venus rotates backwards, and is it Uranus or Neptune has the axis that's on its side?
Uranus does, yeah.
Uranus does, yeah.
Yeah. See, we love planets here.
Planets rule.
So anyway, think about this month for a second. We're predicting the outcomes and the behaviors, the characteristic traits of people based on the month in which they're born, a month which is totally artificial, based on the universe around us. Okay? And so there's one statement that immediately breaks this entire argument apart. Oh, you could sort of make the case here. Earth is the only planet that follows our months. No other planet would have the same calendar as us. Even if they tried, it just wouldn't work because no other planet is going to move at the same speed and pace around its planet. And furthermore, based on the gravity of our sun, that's going to affect the passage of time to some extent. We've got some time dilation going on. It might be subtle, but it'll be important when trying to figure these things out. So that I think is a really important understanding. It's like the universe does not care about our months.
It doesn't
at all.
Nope. It never has.
A 30-day period or 28-day period or whatever is like so tiny it is unable to be registered on another planet, and it is so fast that it's like an eternity on another planet. So like the universe does not care about how we think of months.
It's not a standard unit of measure, period.
No, it's not.
Arguably, all of our months are not even created equal.
That's true.
We have weird months. So anyway, it's important to remember that. Keep that in mind as we talk about these dates and the months and all that stuff. Is like, this is an artificial cultural construct that people are basing these future predictions on. Now, Thagard in 1978 made a clear argument that astrology is, in fact, a pseudoscience. It's not even just kind of hand-wavy, wooey stuff, but it is an actual pseudoscience. He used two specific criteria for this. Basically, astrology could be considered pseudoscientific if, one, it has been less progressive than alternative theories over a long period of time and faces many unsolved problems, and two, but the community of the practitioners makes little attempt to develop the theory towards solutions of the problems, shows no concern for attempts to evaluate the theory in relation to others, and is selective in considering confirmations and disconfirmations. And I think ultimately that's what it comes down to, is at the end of this here, the idea of confirmations and disconfirmations. When people argue it, I mean, I've read several articles. The one article that I pulled for this was, people who argue against astrology don't understand it.
That's ironic.
That is the argument that pseudoscientists make all the time, right? You just don't understand it.
Yeah.
You just don't get it like we do.
You're not in the know. You think you know, but you don't actually know. It's a hand-wavy, dismissive thing of like, this is how I'm going to get around the fact that I don't have an argument. Now, what's unfortunate, though, is that like there probably are some really legitimate cases where someone's arguing against something and they're wrong, but it's because they don't understand that thing.
Right.
And so it's not necessarily hand-wavy to say that they don't understand it, and that's why they think incorrectly about it. But in this particular case, there's also no evidence, they don't have anything to support it with.
Right.
So anyway, another one, Kelly in 1997, makes some clear claims about astrology in their article, specifically stating, quote, modern advocates of astrology cannot account for the underlying basis of astrological associations with terrestrial affairs, have no plausible explanation for its claims, and have not contributed anything of cognitive value to any field of the social sciences, end quote. So
that's
not
harsh.
a fan. Not a fan at all.
That is harsh. Arguably, you could see a bias in that. Like, there's a lot to unpack within that article. It was pretty interesting, but I think the core of that, when you get into it, is that they're not really accounting for the underlying basis, right? Like, nobody can explain spheres of influence or any of those things, like, from a scientific standpoint. So, and nobody's taking steps to prove that stuff.
Yeah, I think sort of as you were saying, and just to add to that, is that it's not giving us anything. There is nothing scientifically of value in this. We don't benefit from it. Like, it's not helping anything.
Exactly. Now, Lopez et al. In 2021 found that for younger demographics between 18 and 23, higher levels of stress may make folks more susceptible to the belief system. So they were studying some students in Manila the Philippines, and they were finding that a lot of the students were gravitating towards using astrological processes or procedures or practices in times where they were reporting higher levels of stress, especially in college or for work or based on current events. So specifically that cited COVID as a stressor, and a lot of people finding astrology as a result of being stressed out about COVID.
I could see that. I feel like I maybe heard that from other people sort of talking about as they were going through experiencing COVID and how they were dealing with that. So
it's like a faith-finding exercise, right? Like people find faith in times of crisis.
Right. Yeah. So something that offers some comfort, which is important because that's
Right.
understanding in part why people would start to believe and get involved in this in the first place and what would maintain that.
Right. Absolutely.
Okay, and so one more we have for studies. We have Anderson, Pearson, and Kajonius in 2022. That is the year of this recording. Conducted a study in which they tested personality traits as a predictor for following astrology beliefs. So I wonder what astrology sign is that you're more likely to believe in astrology signs.
Apparently Capricorn, if I'm to follow conformity.
Okay, sure, that works.
Yeah, I don't know.
Anyway, so in the study, they collected data from 264 participants and found that strong belief is correlated with lower intelligence and higher narcissism, which was the highest predictor among other personality factors. Wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And they did 4 separate personality tests to do this too.
Okay. So I guess take that for what it is.
We are not commenting one way or another.
Yeah. That's just what they said. We're just reporting what we found right now. So it's out there.
There you go.
And it does lead though into, I was interested in looking up what others have said about why there is this rise in astrology, why people believe in astrology to begin with, and that sort of thing. So, and then we've already more or less mentioned this, but it's unverified is a generous way of describing it. It lacks any and all evidence. It is not necessarily helpful. Not necessarily harmful, although it can be depending on how it's being used and who's being exploited and that sort of thing. But some of the sources that I found talking about why people believe this reported that going back to and related to conspiracy theories episode we did is the uncertainty. So I think a lot of times when people are coming through the world and things happen that lack explanation, or they want a bigger explanation than what seems satisfying based on the magnitude of the event. If there is a gigantic once in a century storm that freezes a part of the country that is normally very hot, like people want a big explanation for that. Like it can't just be that sometimes big storms happen. That doesn't seem satisfying to them, right?
Right.
What they want instead is, a cabal of government people were punishing them for dissenting from popular opinion. What they wanted is the magnetic field of a star 250 million light years away passed through the retrograde of fever dream in a star nursery, and that caused the storm to erupt on the planet. They want some kind of big explanation. And another one that I found was this idea that people were sort of looking at astrology in this sort of self-reflective way, and that they were using the foil of astrology, if you will, to just sort of think about who they are and who they want to be and that sort of thing. And that was part of what was going on the rise. And I think that there's definitely some potential there. And I think, it always comes back to the fact that this is an entirely language-based thing. And that what we've got is we've got some people who, for whatever reason, this is filling in some gaps for them. I think there's some uncertainty is going to be part of it, and that there's something's happening. And if you don't have an immediate explanation, a fun one is astrology. And I do think that there is a part of this that's fun and amusing, and that's part of what keeps it going. There's definitely a community that exists. And because this community, this is actually relevant to the conspiracy theorists again. What's interesting about the community, I think, is that they are people who are being told they're wrong and then sticking to it. And that gives them a common enemy, a reason to unite, and something to stand for in particular, right? And so the beliefs at that point don't even really matter as much as the group and their identity in that group. And so what can happen, I think, is that when people are in these situations, it's more about recruiting new members and standing your ground than anything else. And then just trying to have, more numbers and being loud. Is essentially how the NRA has worked for so long,
right.
Is just, being loud and not necessarily, trying to recruit, but not having that many members really. in comparison to other things. So anyway, the point being that I think that that's another important piece of this is that there's various components of motivation to do this because it attracts a sort of a social group. And then I think it also just helps. It's kind of fun. I think it's amusing. And then I think that the other part of this, that there's some amount of just sort of like going back to what they said, the sort of narcissistic look of like, oh, this is about me. Let's talk about me. Let's think about me.
The stars are about me.
Yeah, stars are about me. The universe cares about me and what I'm doing. And that star over there, that thing, the light I'm seeing from it is getting here after, the light's been traveling for 1 million years and it's just now getting to me, but it timed it perfectly because it's for me.
Yeah.
And just when I was born, incidentally. So there's I think a part of it there. And there's certainly more to unpack in that, but I think it's going to be different for many people. And those are some of the factors that are probably relevant for a lot of them, at least.
So before we get into the last little bit, and before I discover exactly what it means to be a different sign, because I have a different sign than apparently I thought I did, we're just going to hear some words from some people who are selling things, possibly some lawn care.
All right, your yard is well taken care of, we hope, using that promo code Why We Do What We Do, lawn care, for your 100% discount.
Yeah.
We have some more interesting tidbits for you, though.
Yeah. So the first one is I actually learned that a lot of presidents use astrologers to help guide decisions, which is horrifying. Okay.
No.
But specifically, Ronald Reagan would regularly consult an astrologer before almost every major move or decision. So that should tell you enough about how much this works well or not.
That explains the 80s.
I mean, we have a war on drugs because of an astrologer, more likely. So, here we are.
Oh, man.
Trickle down. Thanks, Sagittarius.
All right. Now, in 2020, there is this is hot off the presses a year and a half ago, 13th zodiac sign, Ophiuchus, also known as the serpent bearer.
Yeah, so that's what we're saying. Maybe Greg Abbott is the serpent bearer.
That makes a lot of sense.
That's the most metal name ever. Like,
yeah.
I would for sure go to a show and expect a black metal band named Serpent Bearer to be playing and then be like, this rules. Or just Ophiuchus, as I imagine that's pronounced. So,
like, when in the calendar does this take place? This is people who are born on leap years only?
This takes place in December.
Okay.
It pushes some of the other zodiac signs aside. It's like, nah, this is my space.
Okay.
Like, all the other signs were like, seats taken.
Yeah.
And he came in and was like, no, and sat down anyway.
Like, this is my space. And we're like, hey, this is Facebook.
So yeah, this is Facebook. Get out of here.
I would imagine that it was like June 6th, 2006. That's where...
That's the one it should be. That's the one day.
Yeah.
It's only one day.
And February 29th. It could be both of those days.
Yeah, either one of those are fine. If you are born on a leap year or you're born on January 6th, 2006.
June 6th.
You are a serpent bearer. June 6th. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
You're right. All right. So in 2021, new star charts had emerged, specifically going back and looking at the time frame in which the Earth had moved. And basically what this did was it resulted in changes to some people's zodiac signs. The reason for the change is that there has been a shift in our poles, resulting in a change in the stars that we see in the sky. And this means that as of this writing, I am now a Sagittarius on the cusp of a Capricorn. I am not a Capricorn.
What am I? What does this make me?
I don't remember what it is, so I'm so sorry that I didn't find that information for you.
Can we still be enemies?
We can still be enemies. Well,
Okay.
So to kind of update, so my traits before, my new traits as a Sagittarius is that I'm optimistic, I'm a lover of freedom, hilarious, fair-minded, honest, and intellectual. And I'm spontaneous and fun, usually with a lot of friends, and perhaps the best conversationalist in the zodiac.
Wow. That seems similar.
So yes, I'm all of those things.
Yeah. Great. Perfect. Now, update. NASA apparently debunked this whole thing in the kindest possible way. Say more about that.
What they did was they evaluated the star charts about 3,000 years ago, and they're like, it's okay. This doesn't change your zodiac sign, but they were just very nice about it and kind of they went back and they're like, there's no evidence to suggest that the zodiac sign should change as a result of these star charts. And so it was really interesting that NASA weighed in onto the zodiac signs for a minute.
All right, great. I can probably calculate about as much impact as that should have on the astrology world. I think the Egyptians gave us this number, and that number is 0.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
So that's where I think the real science and the pseudoscience will meet, is in no man's land.
Of course.
There's definitely more to talk about with astrology. We didn't even get to like moonstones and like that sort of thing. And there's
birthstones and all that.
Yeah, there's plenty. All of it has to do with the various ways in which it is intended to predict or say something about your personality and something about your future and the decisions that you should make, etc. And I think that that's fine. Again, as long as there's no harm, then no foul. What we don't like, again, is people who are persuaded away from doing things that they need to do and are exploited for money and are, I think, also targeted for sort of sexist and otherwise bigoted campaigns. So where that becomes a problem, then I'm a little more firm against it. But otherwise, if it's just going to be silly and fun, then being silly and fun is fine. It might not be my cup of tea, but I'm not going to knock someone else's preferences if they're into it.
Yeah, we're not going to yuck your yum.
Yeah, and I think that kind of actually is already starting into our take-home points. So let's wrap up here with what our take-home points are for this episode.
Yeah, so just to kind of illustrate the nature of the research that went into this and kind of the stuff that you're finding, in one article that I read for this specific set of notes, one of the headers in the article said, quote, "The moon might affect the body the way it affects the moon." So you kind of see what we're dealing with here.
Yeah.
But I think this other quote here is really important too, to kind of sum it up. And this is what I think is really important, because a lot of times you'll find people, especially in pseudoscience, they'll kind of debunk themselves by accident. So This quote says, quote, "I don't hate any sign, although I occasionally dislike what happens when a sign is poorly expressed through an individual personality," end quote. So basically what they're saying is it's not the sign, it's the personality of the person or whatever behaviors they're engaged in, which seems to occur regardless of the sign influence, right? So maybe they don't like this person and they happen to be this sign, or maybe they expect this out of a Taurus and this Taurus is doing something entirely different. So ultimately what we're saying is like the indicator of like, dislike, preference, non-preference, and all that comes down to the behavior and the personality of the person and their interpersonal interactions, and not necessarily their sign itself.
That's a real Capricorn thing to say.
You coming in with the Libra starting conflicts is ridiculous.
Now, many of the rebuttals from members of the astrology world are similar to other pseudoscience arguments you're going to hear. For instance, one article said people who argue against it just don't understand what they're arguing. We've sort of mentioned that one. This is Pseudoscience 101. But to avoid the hand waviness going on here, we have plenty of studies to show that astrology, in fact, does not work in any way that it's touted. It doesn't really do anything. That's all pretty easy to debunk and find, actual research about that. So something to keep in mind there. But yeah, I do think that ultimately one of the things that I would also walk away from this episode is just acknowledging that people are going to believe in this for a variety of reasons. A lot of it has to do with belonging to a group. There's also going to be things where it's filling in the gaps of an unknown. I think there's some amount of fun that's had in doing this. And then obviously this sort of, I'm trying to avoid using the word narcissist again, but the inflating of one's own ego about stuff, right?
Yeah.
Is sort of how it describes. So that's something I think is important. And again, just highlighting the fact that like, there's lots to say about this and we didn't get it all. And there's more to unpack and all of that. And so, but this is, a fun, I think, overview and getting into this. And there's definitely some things that I learned as part of this. So hopefully you did too.
Yeah. I do think it is very like me-centric, and I think that is something that's like kind of just inherently built into making the assumption that the cosmos have aligned in a way that has influenced you specifically. So like there is that kind of inherently built into this. But yeah, I think it's overall it's a fun thing. It's not anything that's super harmful. And where it becomes harmful is when you're making decisions and losing critical thinking based on fatalist views or based on predictors that are not actually predictors. I think that's really important to remember is like, you can do this, but keep your critical thought and make your decisions based on facts and not whether, Saturn is your house.
I like that. I don't think I could end on a better note than that.
All right. So then we should do recommendations, yeah?
We should.
Recommendations.
So I finally got to sit down and watch a couple movies over the last couple weeks. I traveled for a little bit. I was in a hotel. I got to see The Rock on TV, which is hilarious because it was all edited, for TV.
Oh,
so
yeah.
It's always very funny.
I thought you meant like Dwayne Johnson at first, but no, you're talking about like the Michael Bay movie.
the Nick Cage, Sean Connery vehicle.
Nice.
That had quite a cast, quite an ensemble cast. There's a lot of people in that movie.
I take pleasure in cutting you, boy.
Yeah, Nick Cage is at his finest in that movie. But I finally got to sit down and watch Dune.
Nice. Yay.
It is beautiful. Some of my favorite scenes are when Paul Atreides is exposed to spice and how they make it look on camera like it's like sparkling and tingly and all that. Even if you don't like sci-fi, it is beautifully shot. Every shot is meticulous. It's clean. It's clear. It's just, it is a cinematic masterpiece.
Yeah.
Even if you're not into the politics of it or the interplay of like space politics and empires and like, you know, traitorism and all that, it's still a really wonderful, amazing movie.
Yeah. Awesome. Love that. You're making me want to rewatch it again.
Yeah. I might rewatch it again.
I know there's supposed to be another one and maybe one after that, but at least one more. So I'm very excited about those.
Yeah, me too, for sure.
So as I've mentioned previously, I've been running a lot recently and going on sort of longer runs out in the world. Jogs, you might call them, because I'm not fast. I'm just plodding along. But anyway, I use an armband that holds my cell phone as I run. You know, it's conveniently located. I can get to it easily, and that I'm also not concerned it's going to break. And I use that to obviously track my running and that sort of thing. But the armband that holds my cell phone broke. And so I had to get a new one. And so I was looking around and I found this one online. And so far, this is maybe the best one I've ever used. Now, that's not to say it's the best one out there, but it's the best one that I have found. And it's called the Tribe Water Resistant Cell Phone Armband.
Okay.
I think Tribe is the brand. There's a couple of things I really like about it. One is that the Velcro is actually really good and it's relatively large. So like in the previous ones I've had, the Velcro patch was kind of small and it came off easily, and that was very annoying. And this one is like, it goes all the way across, so it holds pretty well. Another is that the facial recognition works through the plastic cover on it.
Oh, nice.
Which is not the case on the previous ones I've had, because I've got the iPhone with the facial recognition. And so that's handy to have working. And then another is that it has a spot specifically for holding headphones and for holding like a key and stuff like that. So if you had to like, you know, store something in there. So anyway, I found that to be a very fruitful purchase, I guess. And so if people are out there and they're into running and they want a cell phone armband, I think you could do worse than the Tribe Water Resistant Cell Phone Armband. So I'll put a link for that. I love that.
Yeah. I'm so glad you found that.
Well, as I said, we probably did not hit on everything that you would want to hear about astrology. And I'm sorry, we did our best, but feel free to reach out to us and let us know the things that we missed. You can reach us on social media at WWD Podcast. You can email us directly if you'd like to do that at info@WWDpodcast.com. If you'd like to support us, you can always rate and review the show. Tell a friend. Be like, hey, there's this great podcast. That's the best. You should probably listen to it if you would like your life to be any better than it is now. That's generally the pitch that I like to go with, and it works every time. 60% of the time it works every time. All jokes aside, that's sharing us is legitimate, with a friend is a legitimate way to help support the show. And then, of course, if you join us on Patreon, you get all kinds of extra goodies. And we have a merch store that is just like loaded with stuff. We've got tote bags, we've got beanies, we've got stickers, we've got hats, we've got sweaters, we've got jackets, we've got shirts. There is stuff galore for you to get at our merch store. Mm-hmm. And so head on over there and check it out. And you can get some rad swag to support the show. And if you have any specific ideas for things you'd like to see in the store, you should let us know. And we might add those things if they're really good ideas. And if not, then we'll just politely ignore you.
Yep.
So anyway, we could not do this podcast without people who do a lot of help for us. And that includes our amazing Patreon supporters, Amanda, Brad, Kathleen, The Daily BA, Justin, Justine, Kim, Kostia, Layla, Megan, Mike M, Mike T, and Shauna. And then my team of people, the crew behind the glue that makes this thing work, which is Justin, Shane, Selena, Kyle, Alan, and Britt. Shane, you're one of those names. I said your name in there.
Yeah, you said my name.
And so thank you for recording with me today, Shane. Thank you, everyone, for listening. Is there anything that I missed or anything we need to leave on before we say our goodbyes?
May the stars align for your future endeavors.
Indeed. I like it. All right, perfect. Well, if that's all, then I think we're done. This is Abraham.
And this is Shane.
We're out.
See ya.
You've been listening to Why We Do What We Do. You can learn more about this and other episodes by going to www.wwdpodcast.com. Thanks for listening, and we hope you have an awesome day.